First topic tonight. Why do tall goalies tend to have troubles with low shots? Okay. So um, this comes down to, like I said, like when we do our clinic, one of the things I'm going to work on with our goalies is understanding where your physical limitations are. And unfortunately, with tall goalies, a lot of coaches just really don't understand physics. They don't understand geometry. They don't understand just what an athlete is going through in order to teach them kind of how to get down on a ball. And the other thing here, pardon me, I've got too many Girl Scout cookies in my face. But so I got a question this week from a rather tall goalie going like, I seem to have trouble. I seem to do okay with shots up top, but I have trouble with low shots. What's the deal? And so, um, what we want to deal with here is what is it? Ben Stone. Now I'm getting distracted. Ben Stone says no. We just see them on TV and movies. Shortbread are the best. Chris Inzer, yeah. Like I don't know if these are the ones you're talking about. And then carry on. Hey there, Ethan. Ethan, a tall goalie who struggles with low shots, and I are watching together. Cool, Ethan. And I apologize, man. I totally missed you twice now. I feel bad. And I got a couple other goalies I got to apologize to. So here's the thing. What is forgotten in the sport of field lacrosse? Okay, what is totally forgotten when it comes to goaltending in field lacrosse is that if we predominantly play the game that we're just going to try to save the ball with our stick, which is basically what is taught across the board, right? You're basically trying to play with one hand, right? So what you could do to test this is take your goalie, put him in a cage, take the stick away. Okay, take the stick away, because when you take the stick away from a lacrosse goalie, lots of things change. Goalies learn very quickly about certain things when you take the stick away. And one of the concepts that I'm really adamant about is that a lot of goalies use their stick really as a form of protection, not just making saves. Because if you shoot a ball right at them, they tend to struggle. Okay. So the idea though is that when you take the stick away now and you say like, okay, you can only save the ball with one hand. Well, it feels kind of silly to stand with the hand like way over here, right? Or if you're left-handed, way over there, right? So what'll happen naturally is that, like, let's say you shoot the ball to the stick side, right? So again, the goalie doesn't have a stick in their hand; they're just using one hand to stop the ball. And I don't teach the one arm behind the thing. I'm just using an example to show this. All right, exaggeration sometimes teaches best. So what'll happen is like the goalie might get in the cage and they'll adopt a stance like they have their stick in their hand, which ironically, when you take the stick away, looks really stupid. Okay. So, but then over time, like let's say you shoot a couple balls, they're off stick or they're off hand side in this case, and what they'll naturally start to do is when they go back in their stance, is their hand will come to a more central location, which proves that the idea here is not to have your stick hanging like way over to your stick side, so it's close to that side, right? And somehow give you an advantage to say, because every inch you move right is an extra inch you have to move left. Every inch you move up is an extra inch you move down. You have to move down if the ball goes there, because we can get shot on in most situations about all the way around us, like 360 degrees. Okay, so the idea then, if your goalie is tall, is that naturally that stick, that top hand is going to migrate further up in the cage. Now, if your goalie is really tall, like I have a goalie currently up in Canada who's like 6'2", 6'3", and the idea of teaching that goalie like eye thumb ball is ridiculous, because the idea then is like is that the stick is way too high and the stick is actually above the crossbar. So the first thing you got to think about is like, I want to get everything I can of value inside of that 6x6, right? So I don't want my stick anywhere outside the like above the crossbar. I don't want it hanging outside the post. I need to morph in certain situations so that stick comes inside. But then you have to realize, like, okay, again, every inch I go up is an extra inch I go down, or I have to cover if I go down. Now, for tall goalies, typically what happens is their femur, that the leg bone, like the upper leg bone from your hip to your knee, that's your femur, that is long. Okay. And that is usually when you see tall kids, it's usually their femur is significantly longer. It's not like all of a sudden the bones from their knee to their ankle is like excessively tall, but it can happen. So when you teach squatting, right? So as a strength and conditioning coach, when you teach squatting, there's all sorts of angles there, or deadlifting. There's all sorts of angles. There's the length of the spine, there's the length of the femur, all this stuff. So what happens for tall goalies physically, naturally, is that they don't, as a general rule, they don't like to bend their knees, right? And I know that's a big, vague kind of thing to just like to kind of say, but again, when you have like if you look at like Olympic weightlifters, they tend to be very short femur. They have a long torso, short femur, but it allows them to bend their knees and get down in a good position. Like the spine is up, it allows them to get down in a good position. So if you take an athlete who naturally, if they're tall and they have long femurs, they don't necessarily like to bend their knees because that's a big long lever, right? That takes a lot of strength, right? Because the longer the lever, okay, the longer the level, ideally, the easier it is to lift something. But when the fulcrum is on the end, which is the knee, it's really, really difficult. Okay. So most tall goalies don't like to bend the knee and basically drop their butts. Now, what's happened is that some goalies who have adopted that like very wide feet, kind of vertical shin position, kind of like a power lifter, like doing a wide stance squat, you'll see them get in this like really wide, exaggerated stance, but they're not mobile there. They're not very mobile. But what it does though is it brings the stick head down to a more central location in the net. So so you can take the net and if you put the net into like a big grid, all right. When we take a goalie and we widen their feet and we get their knees out over their toes and they squat down, well, that stick head is going to come down on some of those horizontal lines across the cage. Okay. Um, and then and then vertically on the vertical axis, if that stick head goes out too far to the right, well, now if that shot goes like off stick low, that's a long way, right? That's a long way, and you can actually do this. If you go online, you can find and I wish I could kind of find the website I had used for this, but you can Google like grid overlays and put them on a photo of your goalie, and you can show your goalie like, okay, wait a second, every inch we're up is an extra inch. It's hard to go down, whatever. You can see it on the graph. But the point is like, okay, now we take a tall goalie and they're naturally going to be further up in the cage. But now if we have to ask them to go down, like to make an off stick low save, um, then they have to it's a significant dynamic move. And a lot of kids are just not capable of doing that. Now, you've all seen dynamic warm-ups, like air quotes around dynamic, right? Most strength coaches I know, if you stand on a sideline and you watch a team doing a dynamic warm up, there's like maybe 10% of the kids are doing it properly, if that. And then the rest of them are just like they're not spending any time of 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 impact in ranges of motion that can help them, right? So to for a goalie to get down on a ball, that is a big dynamic. It takes a lot of strength. Pardon me. It takes a lot of strength, and a lot of goalies just don't want to. They don't put in that effort, right? So, and for like some big generalities here, just to share, like, um, if you do like a lunge, or more important, if you do a lateral lunge or what's called a Cossack squat. Um, I wish I could pull all these up for you tonight, but just Google those Cossack, Cossack. That is one of the most impactful moves you can do on a lacrosse goal, actually on any athlete, but a lacrosse goalie in for sure. But the dynamic warm up, yeah, Ben Stone, you got it. Yes, the dynamic warm up is almost just done for appearance here. So for all of you that have goalies, I want to tell you something. When your goalie is in a dynamic warm up, it is not really helping them. Your goalie, actually, all the athletes around the field are better off doing all of those moves, but in a stationary position, right? So I'm not going to do a walking lunge with a twist. I'm just going to lunge and twist and stay in that end range for a second and then come out of it, right? If I do a Cossack squat, I'm not going to do like a lateral lunge because kids don't do anything. And unfortunately, the dynamic warm up, like a lot of other, this is common for a lot of things, but the dynamic warm up got, from what I know, my experience is that it was basically popularized by a guy named Mark Verstegen, who ran a facility in Arizona for a number of years called the Athletes Performance, which then turned into Exos, EXOS. And he trained the German national team. And before that, there had been a study done about with sprinters showing that if you took sprinters, like world-class sprinters, and you did slow static stretching, they were slow. They didn't sprint as fast, but if you did a dynamic warm-up, they sprinted faster, right? So that's where everybody's like, oh my God, we got to do dynamic warm-ups. And no, your young goalie, especially if they're tall, they lack strength in end ranges, right? In end ranges of motion, right? So if your goalie has any sort of knee pain or tendonitis, like I had tendonitis in my knees from the age of 12 on, like all through high school, like I hated to stop moving. I didn't like to squat down to get low to balls because it was just hard on my knees. It hurt. And if your goalie is taller and those levers are even longer, you have to spend even more time with that athlete strengthening their quads so that their knee over toes and increasing their hamstring flexibility and increasing their strength in their glutes. Because I see too many kids who adopt like some sort of stance and they can't get out of it. They can't get down out of it. They can't get up out of it. They just don't have the strength, but they can get there. They can. So for those of you that have ever done any yoga, okay. Now, if you've done yoga and you've thought about it carefully, what you'll realize is that you can get into like a warrior pose, right? Like warrior pose, that big long, it's like a forward lunge. The back leg is way over here, and you can get into it, but you kind of know that you're stuck, right? You're not like popping out of that, but like you're super explosive. Well, if you're tall and you've got long femurs, it's even harder. Okay. So when we're trying to get our goalie to be like dynamic and explosive, especially to shots down low, you have to first look at the physical ability. And across the board, most goalies are super weak because what do? They get out to the field, they do some haphazard dynamic warm up, and then they hop in the cage and they're getting shot on. And if you watch from the side and you watch the angle of their knee, you will realize that it doesn't go past like a certain point, right? They stand very upright. And if they go to low shots, what they will do is they will hinge at the waist, right? So the knee angle will stay the same. They will hinge at the waist and they will drop forward with the torso or try to get the hands down. Okay. This is very prevalent also with the girls. Uh, Primarily, like one of the things that really affects the girls is how they're taught to save balls that come to the 5-hole, right? And they're taught to like frame the stick between their legs, that sort of thing. No, it's like you've just got to be like down, right? Look at a softball catcher getting to a ball. Look at a baseball catcher getting down in front of a ball. That'll show you a lot. Also, hockey goalies, men and women, So, um, so so you have to look at that. So that's the physical part. The second thing to look at though is that stick position. All right. So again, if you take the stick away and put your goalie in the cage and say, all right, we're just going to play with a glove on. Well, one of the things that changes is the angle of which the ball is released from. So if a shot is taken from like way outside, like beyond 8 yards and 12 yards for the boys and whatever, and that shot is taken from like, let's say it's a sidearm shot and it's 3 feet off the ground or like 3 feet off the ground. Well, if my hand is up here, again, when you start looking at angles carefully, you realize like, wow, the travel that your hand has to go to make it's unusual. Like it's over and above what is necessary. If this gets exacerbated, the closer the shooter gets to the cage, right? So a lot of you uh, will notice sometimes like your goalie is in their position, they're in their stance, and let's say a player kind of comes around from the back of the cage and they drop their stick. Well, I see a lot of goalies where they're just still in their same stance, looking down at that ball. Well, that's dumb because if you take a line from that ball where that ball is going to be released, and draw it up to the crossbar and over to the post and down to the goal line, you'll realize that, well, now I've taken my hand, that stick, like way out, from being in a more centrally located position to make a save. And when you start adding in like the time and the angles and the geometry and all this stuff, you realize like, wow, it's almost worse than if my goalie was just in a stance and their hand was up high, the stick head's up high, and they're shooting the ball from outside, right? So so this is what a lot of coaches spend zero time with, this type of thinking, of angles and how angles change, and then how the position needs to change accordingly based on where the ball is coming from. And if you follow if you follow Instagram at all, and you start seeing like the creativity of some shots, like I saw one shot this week, a guy comes out in front of a high school kid, basically shot it one-handed between his legs and put it top shelf. Your goalie's got to think about this stuff. Yes, it's rare, but it's also like, you got to realize like what is that ball capable of doing from that angle, and then where does my position need to be? And for a lot of tall goalies, they end up caught out because they're so far out of the realm. They don't drop their hand based on where, um, in relation to where that ball is coming from. And you got to think about that. Okay. So the first part's physical. The second part is the base stance that they're in. And then what I would say the third biggest thing for me over the years, like I used to pick this part a lot, but some of you have heard me say this idea of like get ugly. I see too many goalies trying to look, they look good, they look pretty, they're in their stance, they look like a college kid, but they don't have the physical ability to do that. And then they try to move to the ball, and then they're trying to be too precise. They're trying to catch this microscopic thing out of the air, when really what they need to do is just get ugly and get something in front of it. And for a lot of my taller goalies, where they're trying to get that stick down to a shot, there's not enough time to cover the distance with a stick. You got to think of something else. And that's where, like, I think we covered this last year, that Tim Troutner clip that I showed people, where, he gets down and the stick comes centrally located, and he's ready to get his knees in front of that ball, like an ice hockey goalie. And I've seen talk like, people disagree with this. They're like, oh, coach, goalies shouldn't drop to their knees. Bullshit. Goalies need to put whatever they have available that they can get in front of said ball as quickly as possible. That's a fact. So what I find happens here is, for a lot of older coaches, and I would say older, like, so I'm 50, right? So anything in kind of the 40-year-old and up, we all grew up being taught like, oh, you shouldn't drop to your knees. And that came from ice hockey, in my opinion, because ice hockey goalies back in those generations, they were taught, they didn't butterfly, they stood up, right? But we all saw how that went, right? Now you cannot play the game of ice hockey if you play stand up, right? You just can't do it anymore. For those of you guys, if you watch the Grant Fuhr documentary that's on net, I think it's on Netflix or Amazon or something. I can't Google it. It's amazing, right? For those of you guys that are hockey fans, you'll remember Grant Fuhr with the Edmonton Oilers and 5 Stanley Cups. Unreal. If you watch him play, that is how I believe the lacrosse goalie of the future needs to think about making saves down low. All right. So for a tall goalie, you've got to be ready to use your feet. I also learned that from Paul Schmoller when I was in high school. So Paul Schmoller was one of the greatest goalies that ever played the game of field lacrosse. He was a goalie at Cornell. He's a world team goalie. Tragically, he passed away of cancer a number of years ago. Super smart guy. And I was like 5'7" in high school, and Paul was like 6'1", 6'2". And he's the first goalie that ever said, you got to use your feet. You got to use your legs. And nobody had ever told me that, because I was only taught you got to use, and that was like what, 112 years ago now, when I was in high school, something like that. Okay. So the idea is that a tall goalie needs to be physically capable to get down. You've got to bring the stick more centrally located to get down in front of those balls, but then you just can't try to be so precise. It's like you just got to pardon me, but you got to throw shit in front of the space where you think that ball's going to go, and you're going to make more saves, right? How many of you guys saw that clip on Instagram this week of the goalie that like threw his foot out and kind of pulled the Scotty Rogers, like one arm, throw the stick in front of it, and he got it with his ankle, like, and his foot was, he looked like a handball goalie. Okay. That's what I'm talking about. Like, you got to be prepared to throw stuff. And for those coaches, and this is just one more thing, for the coaches that say you shouldn't, do that, you shouldn't drop to your knees. And I'll cover that like weird discussion about like somebody breaking their femur doing that, like drop, like, I'm sorry, if that kid broke their femur, they need milk. They need some, like, a better diet. That kid's like one, lack of vegetable away from scurvy, if that's the issue. Okay. But the idea is that we've got to get stuff in front of the ball to make that save. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. It's all it's ever been, but it's been so bastardized with like culture and positioning and stance and all this stuff, when in fact you just got to get out there and make something happen. Ben Stone writes, Jess has been training with some of the women who are going to the World Cup this year. Being pretty has no chance against these players. They are too quick. It's true. It's true. It's totally true. Especially on the girl side. Especially on the girl side. You've got to be big. You got to be a presence, and you just got to get stuff in front of the ball. Okay. So what should your goalie be doing? One, if your goalie is tall, your goalie, and this really holds true for all goalies, but you've got to be working your legs in a way where those knees are over your toes. This is not, I won't get too deep in this now, but that is also a myth that ruined athletes for a really long time, right? But you've got to be working on opening up the hips and opening up the adductors and getting space in there so that you can drop, basically what we say, like drop your butt, like drop your ass to the ground so you can get down and be in a more powerful position. And I'm not talking about just getting down to a space and getting stuck there, but being mobile and up and down. If you look at NFL players, if you look at like if you look at the offensive linemen, that is probably one of the best athletes to look at in terms of like big dudes getting down, right? Because it's all about what they call pad level, right? Who's ever lower wins, right? And so there's a lot of lacrosse goalies out there that they get lots of shots, but they spend not nearly enough time effectively working their lower body. And yeah, I get it. You guys all do like your team stuff, and hey, we do strength, we do physical conditioning twice a week as a team. It's really fun to get the kids together, and it's really, it's really good. It's a good bonding thing. No, strength and conditioning is not about team bonding. Strength and conditioning is all about getting your athlete into a completely different space, mentally, physically, emotionally. And that all comes from being in the gym. And that does not happen if your goalie is like doing like 3 sets of 400 with their teammates and giggling through the whole thing. Like, sorry, but like, really, go lift something heavy often and it will change things for you. Okay. Does that make sense? Right? Does that make sense? Like this just gets me crazy. So if you're a tall goalie, man, good things will happen if you get stronger in your lower half. But if you don't do that, then you're hosed with like a fire hose, right? Like a big one. Okay. Make sense? All right, guys. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening wherever you are. Do me a favor, hit the like button if you like this, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. When you're ready, head on over to lacrossegoalieuniversity.com/coaching so I can work with you and your goalie. And while you're at it, check out athletespecific.com to learn more about mental performance and high performance. You may not know this, but I work with athletes in a variety of sports. Lacrosse is my love, but man, I love athletes and the families who support them. So head on over to athletespecific.com, check it out, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.